I'd like to get into some of the specific terms in the conscious language guide because I think a lot of these things, and I will admit I've used some of these terms, are just they're part of our common vernacular. And you point out why some of these things are problematic. And I'd love maybe to do a lightning round of sorts where you could just explain to people who are listening why a word or a term might hit the ear of somebody the wrong way. So I'll start with this, and these are all in the conscious language guide. First term was wheelchair bound.
Okay, the consideration here is ableism. Bound implies that somebody is confined to their chair, whereas some folks who use a wheelchair see this as a device that lets them go out and explore the world and gives them an element of freedom. And so we don't want to take this ableist approach of assuming that somebody feels confined to a wheelchair.
Birth defect.
Again, ableism. This implies that somebody is defective or subpar, and we don't want to apply that to people. So another term here, I believe, might be like congenital condition. That's something that somebody is born with. So yeah, again, avoiding ableist language here.
Food stamps.
This term carries stigma, and it's also out of date because the program has now been renamed to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and people no longer get paper or physical stamps. Folks will get like a debit card, an EBT card, which their benefits are loaded onto.
And I suspect that term has also been co-opted by politicians who are against social spending on what were formerly called food stamps and being used to represent a group of people who they don't want to offer that support to. That was my little editorializing there. Okay. Died of AIDS.
So AIDS is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And so it refers to a stage of HIV where the immune system is no longer able to function as well. And so people may often pass from an infection that they get that their body can't fight off anymore. So people wouldn't die of AIDS. People would potentially die of an opportunistic infection rather than AIDS itself.
So beyond potentially being offensive, it's just plain inaccurate.
Correct. It is not medically accurate.
Yes. Okay. So here's what I hear a lot. And the term is struggling with depression. And before I ask you to kind of explain why that's troubling to some people, it seems like the intention is good. Struggling is almost an empathic term. You're trying to acknowledge that the person is going through something. And yet that too could be seen very differently.
Yeah, so the alternative here might be something like living with depression, experiencing depression. And while this I think will cause a little bit of conversation for people, but the intent here is not to assume that somebody is struggling with depression. Like some people certainly are, but we don't want to assume somebody's experience. And then we also don't want to imply this idea that you have to be struggling with something to seek out treatment or seek out care or seek out help. Like if you have depression, you can seek out help at any time. You don't have to get to the point where you feel like you're absolutely struggling with it.
So that too, I think, is a great example of what we were talking about earlier about how using the wrong term can literally make people sick. If it's hard for anybody in the best of circumstances to express vulnerability and the fact that they're struggling with anything. And so if you then label the term struggling with depression, you now have probably made it even a higher barrier before people are willing to seek help. That's
right. And that reminds me of, just on that previous question, another way that words can affect health behavior is if words inflict shame or judgment or stigma on a person, this can affect their willingness to interact with healthcare, seek out healthcare, even be honest with their healthcare professional about what they're doing because they're afraid of judgment. That's another way that words can influence the health behavior on the patient side. And so we really don't want to have any of that or have any words that would contribute to that.
Yeah, sometimes my wife and I will be watching TV and a commercial will come on for some kind of medical treatment. And it's something that's very personal in nature, whatever it is. And we'll sometimes give each other a look like, whoa, that's different. That's new. But the immediate follow-up thought is good. By putting that in a national ad, it serves a really useful purpose of removing stigma and presumably makes people more likely to seek help for it than they would if it wasn't something spoken about. By the way, along the lines of the struggling with depression, one of my linguistic pet peeves is when somebody says they lost their battle with cancer. Or they lost their battle with, and Norm Macdonald, the comedian who passed away recently, had a bit about this where he said, not only is it ridiculous because it assumes that if you end up dying of cancer, that you lost your battle, you didn't succeed. And it assumes that those who survived cancer are somehow stronger than the ones that didn't. But he also just pointed out how inaccurate that is too, because he says, look, when you die, the cancer dies too. So at best, it battled you to a draw. So I thought that was a pretty good way of putting the flip on that one. Did you have a comment on that battling cancer phrase?
I was actually thinking about this yesterday because we see this combative, warlike language come up in health all the time. And I think cancer is a great example of that, of like they're battling cancer, they lost their battle. And it implies this combative nature between your body and something else. And I just ask myself, and I don't have an answer for this, what would health and healing look like if that narrative was different? Like if we had a different way of talking about that, what would health and healing look like? Not just for cancer, but for other conditions as well. And so this is one of those like winding roads I go down of like thought sometimes of how can we reimagine potentially how we talk about things, and then that reimagines how we conceptualize and then how we treat and how we cure or how we even just approach disease and health.
Thanks for watching this video clip of the Speak Good podcast. If you'd like to hear the complete episode, please check out your favorite podcast directory and subscribe now. Thanks for watching.